Welcome back, you guys, and yeah, we're gonna have to have a conversation about this OKC Thunder team after a third straight first-round exit. How does this team get better? Is it possible for this team to get better? Does this front office need to make any trades? Better yet, does this team have the backbone to make a major trade? What's the scariest part about Russell Westbrook going into his 30s as a high-usage point guard? We're gonna talk about all of that, and I'll also tell you the trade that I will make. So where to start with Russ? I think the most concerning thing about his individual play this season was not just his efficiency, but where his offense has been relegated to at the age of 30. For most of the series against Portland, he was a half-court player, and you don't get the best version of Westbrook when he's playing in the half-court for a majority of the game. If Russ is going to be relegated to a half-court player on offense and be a jump shooter, the rest of his time on this Supermax contract is not going to be pretty if he's not putting pressure on the rim. We just watched that Portland series. Westbrook does not have the same acceleration when he's going downhill. He's not blowing by people. His finishing is getting worse because he's not getting the same lift off of 1 foot like he usually does, and he's not dunking either. I don't think I saw him dunk once in that series. Another thing that's concerning, he's getting to the free throw line less. Just 2 years ago, he was getting to the free throw line 10 times a game. He was one of the best in the league at drawing contact and putting pressure on the back line, but now he's only getting to the line about 5 times a game. So now, since he can't get to the free throw line as much, he's got to rely on his jumper, which isn't working well either. I mean, you have the Blazers bench in the middle of a playoff game telling Enes Kanter to back up because they want Russ to shoot. Say whatever you want about his three-point shot throughout his career, but his mid-range pull-up is something he's always been able to fall back on. He's made a living off of that foul line shot that he sprints into when the paint is packed, but it is not there anymore. In the 2017 playoffs against the Houston Rockets, Russ shot 22 out of 51, so 43% on mid-range shots. Against Portland this year, he shot below 30% on those same mid-range jumpers. That pull-up jumper that used to be automatic is an instant brick now. It's difficult to build an efficient offense around somebody that's declining in pretty much everything they were good at. When I say it's very difficult to build an elite offense with a point guard that can't shoot, I'm talking about in this pace and space era where the three-point shot pretty much decides who wins and loses every game. Westbrook has shot below 40% from the field for 3 straight postseasons now. One of the things that people were pointing to for OKC to win this Portland series was that they were going to be able to exploit Enes Kanter on defense. Enes' weakness is defending in space against guards that can pull up from 3. This is one of Kanter's weaknesses on defense. He can't really defend in space against guards that can pull up from 3 off of picks. But nobody on OKC besides Paul George can do that, so he was able to stay on the floor during this series. Now, what about Paul George for this series? I thought he played okay and was their best player. He had 2 bad shooting games, and his defense was better overall after game 2. McCollum was making some tough shots over him. He was playing hurt, but that 6-week stretch where he was shooting like Steph Curry is probably not who he is. It's just not sustainable. That stretch of games definitely masked a lot of OKC's problems on offense. What we saw in this series is probably closer to what they actually are as a 5-man offensive unit, unless there's some internal development that I'm not anticipating. Most of OKC's massive contracts are locked in till 2021, so the best they can hope for is more internal development or tiptoe around the edges in free agency. Andre Robertson is getting $10 million next year, Dennis Schroeder is getting $15 million next year, Steven Adams is getting $24 million next year, and Russ and PG are getting $30 million plus individually next year. The team needs shooting, but they are capped out. Finding a shooter at the guard or forward positions is not going to be easy when you have no money and every other team is looking for the same exact thing as you. They're paying $146 million for this roster next year and $137 million the year after that. Getting some shooter that's going to solve most of their problems probably won't happen this free agency. Any shooters that they get on a minimum deal will have huge individual flaws. There's a reason certain guys only get minimum contracts in the NBA. They wouldn't be signing those minimum deals if they were reliable. There's not much to work with in free agency, so the elephant in the room is they could make a trade involving Russell Westbrook, Paul George, or Steven Adams, but even then that's unlikely. I think it's safe to say they're not trading Westbrook or George. Steven Adams trades are probably going to be discussed in the front office this summer though. Moving to other parts of the roster, trading Dennis Schroeder wouldn't get them enough assets back given his contract and lack of shooting. Andre Robertson is nearly unmovable without draft picks being attached, given his injury history. He didn't play at all this season, and we have no idea what he's going to look like when he gets back. Putting in young developing players like Jeremy Grant and Terrence Ferguson with Steven Adams is one of the ways you can do a trade. Adams is a good player, he's a reliable player, but is he worth nearly a fourth of your team's salary cap? He might be slightly injured right now, but Adams did not outplay Enes Kanter. That is not a good sign going forward, and especially when the narrative of Kanter is that you can't play him for significant stretches in the playoffs. I've seen people say, oh, they should think about trading Westbrook. I would be shocked if they traded Westbrook. OKC is a small market, and yeah, they got a loyal home crowd, but it's not like they're getting a Paul George type in free agency, even if they had space. I can't think of a team that will trade for him unless he had like 2 years left in his deal rather than 4. The thing about a Westbrook trade is, I think most of the OKC fan base is still riding with him, even through his declining play. It's them versus the world, which I get. Westbrook means a lot to the city and the fans. The passion they have for their star player is good and all, but there's a double-edged sword to it. You're pretty much stuck with him through the good and bad because of the KD situation and his contract, coupled with his decline. He has bad on-court habits that OKC has absolutely enabled. Let's be real, he's 10 plus years in the league with an MVP, a Supermax deal. This guy came out of the draft as a defensive specialist. Who is he listening to? I don't think a coach, no matter how great that coach is, could convince him to play like Rondo. Billy Donovan is not great, but what do you really want him to do? The roster is what it is. You can bring in the best X and O's coach in the game, but you still have to play to your roster. Russ isn't going to change. A month ago he got asked, do you change anything when you're having a rough shooting night? Russ's response was, have I changed in 11 years? I think that tells you a lot. If keeping Westbrook is the plan, are you okay with losing in the first or second round and Paul George possibly leaving in 3 years? I think if expectations are managed, then this situation can be salvaged. My dilemma with Russ is that I never thought he was as great as some people said he was, but I also sometimes had to defend him because he's not as bad as some people say. His impact on the league and the Thunder have been a positive, but it's getting tough. We're at a breaking point. We're going to learn about the hearts and minds of OKC's management and fans in the next 3 months. 3 straight first-round exits is a lot to think about. You got to readjust the roster to soften this slight Westbrook decline. His finishing at the rim isn't the same, and he has compensated by kicking the ball out more, which is good, but he's kicking it out to guys who aren't volume 3-point shooters. I mentioned this in my playoff prediction video of why I couldn't trust this OKC team going into the playoffs. They don't have enough scoring and perimeter shooting. I'm not absolving Westbrook and Paul George, but they are really the only guys who can get up perimeter shots. OKC isn't built to be a drive and kick team like the Bucks are. If that's how Westbrook wants to play, then cool, that's fine with me, but OKC didn't build their roster to be this drive and kick team, so you're seeing the negatives in real time. Having to rely on Raymond Felton threes at some times is kind of depressing. I don't want to bury Westbrook. I actually like how he played in Game 5. They could have went out really sad at the end of the third quarter, but he fought back and they went out sad at the end of the fourth instead. I think this series tells us more about Lillard in Portland. The Utah series from last year was worse in my opinion. At best, this roster is probably a second-round playoff team, which isn't a bad thing if you manage expectations. The real decline for Westbrook probably won't happen for a few more years, but he's had multiple knee surgeries, so it's coming soon. Russ is not a half-court player, and if he is going to be stuck in the half-court, he has to make threes, but he hasn't made threes reliably ever in his career. OKC is pretty much stuck with him because it's a unique situation where you can't trade him without massive PR backlash because of what he means to the city and how he was enabled. He should have self-reflected after that Utah series last year, but he pretty much doubled down on all those negatives. Why would Russ change when he's been getting all this positive reinforcement? I think OKC will fire Donovan, trade Adams, Ferguson, and Schroeder this summer. I could be wrong, but they don't have a mellow scapegoat this time. The front office is going to have to answer for the roster they built. So do you guys think OKC makes a trade in June or July? Which players are those? Maybe Steven Adams, Jeremy Grant, Dennis Schroeder? Or does OKC even make a trade at all? Do they just keep the same roster and just use their taxpayer mid-level exception and then go with the new season? And that's it for me. Again, I'm on Twitter, so if you want to follow me, I do tweet when the games are on. I'll see you guys soon.